Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my new video. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the 10 reasons why China will benefit from this war going on between Russia and Ukraine. I made a video about the 10 reasons why America would benefit, but as rightly most of you have pointed out, America will only benefit with those 10 reasons in the short term. But I believe in the long term, China would benefit from this crisis. So here are my top 10 reasons why China would benefit. And before I start, guys, and again I have to ask you for a favor, don't forget to share, like, subscribe, comment, whatever you can to support the channel and to push this channel even further. Don't forget to watch this channel from beginning to end. And also, if you really like this channel, don't forget you can buy me a coffee or you can join my Patreon if you really want to support me. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. Number 1, the fall of the US dollar. So this is a benefit for China, mainly because China is the second largest economy, and when America falls, China is the next economy to step up. So the fall of the US dollar, as you know, the US dollar is the world reserve currency at the moment. Most of the world's trade is being done using the US dollar, and unfortunately the US has actually used the US dollar as a weapon. It has sanctioned a lot of countries and it has overused its sanctions policy. So it sanctioned Iran, Venezuela, and many other countries over the years. If you get along with the US, you're fine, but if you don't get along with them or if you don't agree with them or anything, they could sanction you. So the latest sanctioned country is Russia, and Russia isn't any Venezuela or Iran. This sanctioning Russia would be like sanctioning yourself, because Russia is a huge producer of oil and gas, raw materials, agricultural products like wheat, which it exports around the world. And Russia is mainly an export country rather than import country. It is a trade surplus country, and sanctioning Russia is going to be the beginning of the end of the dollar. The whole world is shocked by the West's actions against Russia, and they are shocked because the fact that they can sanction a country so much with this power. And if America picks on another country next, for example China or any other country, a lot of countries will know that they could be finished if America sanctions them. So what a lot of countries are doing now, they're moving away from the dollar. Russia has been doing it for years, for 8 years, so they have prepared for this. China has been preparing for this as well. India has been preparing for this as well. Iran has been preparing, as you know. A lot of the Middle Eastern countries have been preparing. Central Asian countries have been preparing. African countries have been preparing. So a lot of the countries around the world are seeing this, and they're going to slowly weed their way away from the US dollar. So what other currencies out there? Obviously, you got the Chinese yuan. They offer a digital version of that currency which cannot be tracked, because one of the things about America and the way it tracks transactions around the world, it uses a SWIFT system, and SWIFT is a messaging system, but it also can be used to track transactions, and that's how they can place sanctions on a country. So the digital yuan is one way to circumvent sanctions and hide their digital money trail as well. And I believe a lot more countries will start using the Chinese yuan. The Chinese yuan will rise up against the dollar, and less countries will use the dollar because they know they have to move away from the dollar in order for their own survival. Because if US decide to sanction that country in the future, then they are pretty much finished. So a lot of countries are moving away from the dollar. A lot of countries are also using their own currencies in trade as well. Rather than using dollar, they can use their own currency. And also they can use euros as well. Euros is also pretty useful to use. But unfortunately, euro, it doesn't look good as well for the future, because The Europeans have been hit hard by these sanctions on Russia. They're going to be hit hard because of the high gas prices, high oil prices. So the European economy is going to stagnate over the next 10, 20 years. And they've only just recovered from the pandemic. And now, they're going to have to pay for high gas prices, high oil prices. And I'm talking about very, very high gas prices. If Russia decides to stop supplying gas and oil to Europeans, and they could at any moment, because they can divert all of that stuff to China, Europeans are going to be pretty much finished because their industry is going to end. They cannot afford high gas prices. They cannot afford high LNG prices. LNG prices probably 10 times the amount of normal gas prices, because you got to convert the gas into LNG, transport it, convert it back into gas. So it's a big, long process, and it's not cheap. And some people are saying it's between 8 and 10 times more expensive than natural gas going via pipelines. So you see, if European has to depend on LNG, their industry has pretty much given up. They cannot afford high gas prices. They can't be competitive with Chinese companies, for example. If Chinese companies start getting gas pipelines from Russia, cost of making goods and products in China will be way, way cheaper than European goods. And that means China's exports will increase. More people will buy Chinese goods because they're cheaper, better quality, and European businesses will not be able to compete. Then you got all of the citizens in Europe who will have to pay high electricity costs, high gas costs, high petrol costs. The cost of living is going up. The inflation is going through the roof. So Europeans will suffer a lot, and this could push them into recession. And studies have shown that whenever the oil price reaches over 130 to 150 dollars a barrel, then that's when recession kicks in. I'm going to show you a graph. You can see how over the years the rise in oil has always caused recession. So you can see from here, 1989, 1990, there was a huge spike in oil price, and immediately afterwards there was a recession in 1991. And this spike was in 1990, so it wasn't as high as it is right now. And the next big spike was during 2008, and you can see around 2006, 2007, the oil prices started rising up, and eventually it crashed around 2008, and that's why this shut down as well. So you may ask yourself, why does high gas prices cause a recession? Well, you got to think about everything, how everything gets delivered, transferred. So if you're a business, you're going to have to order some raw materials. They might come from China or another country, and you got to transport all of that to your country, transport it by ship, rail, or sea, or even air. That all takes oil, that all takes electricity. So obviously you need a lot of oil for that. And then you got to get it delivered, that takes oil as well. So the cost of goods will rise, including delivery, and which means the business has got more costs, because if he has to build a certain product and he needs to get it lots of raw materials delivered, if those raw materials are more expensive, whether the transport is more expensive because of the more oil, then they're going to make less margin, less profit, and that's what causes recession. If the company makes less profit, and less likely it is to make a profit, and it's going to have less tax receipts. It might have to lay off people for unemployment because it can't make ends meet, for example. So everything is related, you see. It's all about, if a company doesn't make much money, then there's not going to be much jobs out there. It's going to have to make a lot of people unemployed. They're not going to hire any more people. They're going to start looking at ways to cut costs. And when that happens, then there's a recession, because the country is not making enough money and country is suffering. And then you got the problem of high inflation as well. So everything's gone up. inflation's gone up and the wages are not rising up, and the company can't afford to pay more for the wages, because that means they're going to make less profit if they have to pay more wages to people. So that's a problem as well. So where does China come in all this then? Well, China can get cheaper raw materials from Russia, cheaper raw materials from the rest of the world. They can get much cheaper oil and gas from Russia, which means, Russia can have pipelines going from all the way from Russia to China. And as you know, there's a massive border between China and Russia. So they can do things via pipeline. And they don't have to ship anything. They don't have to drive long distances and transport oil like the Western countries will have to do. So China will save a lot of costs, a lot of money in that sense, and they'll be much more competitive compared to Western companies. And also, you got to look at the wages in China is much lower than Western countries as well. So they can get more done at a much cheaper price, and that would put a lot of Western companies out of business. And Chinese goods will be transported all over the world because they are basically cheaper. So that's how China will benefit from this long term. So what has that got to do with the dollar hegemony then? You might ask yourself, what's that got to do with the dollar losing the reserve status? It's got nothing to do with China. Well, if you think about it, if China becomes the number one trading partner with the rest of the world, its trade increases year on year because its goods are made cheaper and cheaper in China compared to the rest of the world. So China will become more of an export market, and they're already insisting on ASEAN to trade in local currencies. So all the goods that's been transported back and forth, they're going to be done in local currencies. They're not going to be done in dollar. All the goods and services they work with Russia, they're going to be done in local currencies as well. That's not going to be done in dollar. And then all of the countries that China has got a relationship with, they will insist on getting it as part of the digital yuan. So as you can see, more and more countries will start using the Chinese digital yuan, renminbi, and they'll be less inclined to use the dollar, because people know using the dollar there is a big risk associated with it. Plus your transactions are tracked and monitored via SWIFT system. And also right now the Middle East is also not getting along with the West as well, and you can see MBS and people like the ruler of UAE avoiding Biden's calls. So eventually you will see Saudi Arabia going away from the US dollar because the relationship is not being good, and they are moving towards China at the moment. And the day that Saudi Arabia starts exchanging oil with digital yuan, then things will change, because after that you can see the dollar declining a hell of a lot. Because one of the things that's keeping the dollar up really high at the moment is the petrodollar, because most of the petrol around the world, most of the oil around the world has been transferred using the dollar. But right now, since those sanctions have been placed on Russia, less and less countries are inclined to use the dollar, and they rather use their own currency or something else like the Chinese yuan or even euro to exchange oil and gas. And in a few years, when the dollar loses its reserve currency, they will look back on 2022 at what event triggered it. And 2022, the day they placed all of these sanctions on Russia, is the time when was the beginning of the end of the dollar. Number 2, Russian trade. So you can see from this website, in December 2021, Russia exported 56.8 billion and imported 29.4 billion, resulting in a positive trade of 27.4 billion. So let's look at Russia's exports and imports, shall we? And you can see its main exports were crude petroleum, refined petroleum, and coal. Commodities not specified. You got gold here as well. And export destinations, you can see China is 11.1% in terms of export destination. Then you got Turkey as well. You got Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Poland, Belarus, United Kingdom, South Korea. So with all of these sanctions, you can see China going from 11.1% to over 90%, because most of these countries have sanctioned Russia, with the exception of Turkey and India. So I'm not sure where Turkey is in the middle of this, but I'm sure with Turkey being in the NATO, being a NATO member, it will be under a lot of pressure not to do much business with Russia. So you never know really. But you can see China exports to China will rise. That could go up to 80 or 90%, and imports as well from China would also probably go from above 90%, because if all of these Western countries have sanctioned Russia, Russia will have no choice but to import all of these goods that it requires from China. And China is a huge manufacturing hub. It is the factory of the world, and anything and everything you can pretty much get from China, apart from semiconductors. The semiconductors China is still working on. It can make 28 nanometer semiconductors, which is probably needed for most of the stuff, 80-90% of the stuff, but the 5 nanometer you need for mobile phones. So I think Russia will not be able to produce any mobile phones in the near future, but they can use mobile phones from China. People like Xiaomi and Oppo and many other Chinese phone companies are still using the 5 nanometers, because those phone companies haven't been sanctioned by TSMC or the West. So I can see Russia using a lot of mobile phones from China. I can see Russia using a lot of cars from China, electric cars, EV cars, for example, because a lot of European car makers, especially German car makers, are not going to be selling to Russia. So you can see the export and import. In terms of export to China, I believe there is one pipeline going from Russia to China supplying gas. There's going to be 3 more being built, so there's going to be 4 in total. And with all of these sanctions happening from the West to Russia, I bet you any dollar that Russia's going to start siphoning off a lot of the gas from that goes to Europe into China as well. So they're going to start building pipelines, taking it from the European locations and into the Chinese locations. And I think within the next year or so, Russia will probably say to Europe, I'm sorry, but we don't want to sell it to you anymore. We're going to sell everything to China. And that's probably the way it's going at the moment. This means Europeans will have to buy liquefied natural gas and oil from more expensive places like America, Australia, and they're going to be liquefied, which means they're going to be up to 10 times more expensive than natural gas. Europeans are not going to be able to survive high gas and oil prices. They're going to probably have a big recession because of it. People are going to be rioting on the street because of the high gas prices, electricity prices that they have to pay, the high inflation costs. So Europe's going to have a very, very tough time over the next few years. Luckily for China, there's going to be 4 pipelines going into China. China will have its gas and oil security mainly from Russia, and China will be laughing all the way to the bank because they're going to be getting it very cheap. They share a border together, and everything's going to be coming directly into China and not via the Middle East, via America, via Australia. So China would be laughing. And also another point, China is the biggest EV manufacturer in the world and the biggest user of EVs, and I can see China using less and less oil over the next few years. China is also the biggest user of renewable energies, and their renewable output is going up year after year after year. I mean, even recently they approved a huge solar farm, a huge wind farm, which is going to be a third of what America produces, which is huge. It's going to be all done in the deserts and provide it to the rest of China. So there's a huge amount of easy EV work going on, renewable work going on around China. So China is going to be less and less dependent on oil and gas over the next few years. With the global witch hunt going on of Russian businesses, Russian billionaires, even Russian people, you will see a lot more Russians investing in China as opposed to the West. Russians have realized investing in the West is going to be a waste of money, because whenever there's a sanctions on Russia, their assets can be frozen or taken away. As you can see, a lot of oligarchs having their yachts taken away, their properties taken away, and a lot of Russian people, they can't use Visa or MasterCard. So a lot of businesses are going out of business because of all of these sanctions. And the Russians are thinking, it's not really a safe bet to be investing in the West or doing any business in the West. So I can see a lot of billionaires and millionaires, and even, people that actually want to start a business, they'll go straight directly to China. So the foreign direct investment in China is going to increase, because you'll see a huge amounts of Russian army moving into China to start businesses or move their businesses to China. And in that way, China is going to win, because their FDI is going to be increasing year on year. More and more companies, and especially Russian companies, are going to start moving to China. And then you have Russian billionaires like Roman Abramovich, who's literally being kicked out of UK. He's been sanctioned in UK, so he's going to be probably going back to Russia, or he may start in new investment somewhere in China. But you can see a lot of Russian billionaires going from west to east because of all of these sanctions and witch hunt against Russian people. So a lot of them will take their money elsewhere, and elsewhere meaning China. Number 4, Russian military. So the good news is Russia has an excellent military. They have the S-400, which is one of the best air-to-ground missile systems in the world. It can take out F-35s. They have some of the best hypersonic weapons. They also have some of the best submarines. They have an amazing military. Not many people give them credit for that. They have a very, very strong military, very good technology, which they don't really share around the world. They got amazing planes, amazing jet engines. And China is recently very, very new when it comes to military. They've had an embargo from the West since the 1980s. So China is still learning, and even though China has got a very, very strong military, there's lots of areas that China can improve on, like the S-400. If China has anything similar to that, or even S-400s, Taiwan would be a breeze. No F-35s will come near China. They will literally be taken out easily. Also, China can benefit from maybe knowledge transfer from submarines. As Russia has some of the best submarines in the world, helicopters, hypersonic missile technology. There's a lot of things that China can learn from Russia. And now that Russia's been sanctioned from the West, I believe that China and Russia will work more closely with the military, because it's basically based on their survival, because they know that the West is after them. The West is literally placed all of these sanctions on Russia, and one day they might even attack Russia, hoping that Russia economy might collapse and they might be very, very weak. They might not be able to pay much on to their military, and that's when NATO might attack Russian borders. So it's important that Russia and China stay strong together, help each other. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of technology transfers between each other, China helping Russia with technology and Russia helping China with technology. They are already doing a lot of joint efforts. They are building joint helicopters, joint submarines in the meantime. They're also building joint aircrafts, and also a moon base as well in space. They're also going to do that jointly as well. So they're doing a lot of joint missions together, and I think that's just going to grow and grow over the years. And all of this sanctions and this Ukraine crisis has just brought China and Russia together. And Russia is also appreciative of China's support for them. China has not caved into the Western pressure. And I'm sure when China needs Russia's help, Russia would be there as well. So I'm obviously talking about the province of Taiwan. If a war ever breaks out along there, China will be looking for Russian help. Russia can help in many ways, either military, or they can provide gas and oil and raw materials that China might need in event of a war. So there's many ways that Russia and China can help each other, and together they are very, very strong. And this is what the West is trying to do. They're trying to break up this friendship. They're trying to break up this relationship between China and between Russia, because they know an independent China or an independent Russia can easily be taken down by the West. But China together with Russia is a super force that is not going to be able to be taken down by any country, not even America or its allies and NATO put together. There is no way. In fact, it will be impossible. You know, Russia has 6,000 nuclear weapons, and China is on its way to building probably another 6,000 as well. So if America has 6,000 nuclear weapons and you got 12,000 nuclear weapons between China and Russia, there is no way that any country would ever dare to go near them. And even with conventional weapons, they would be way too powerful for anyone. And if China and Russia work together, look at their strengths, look at the weaknesses for each country, and work on, you know, a direct path which is beneficial for both countries in terms of military strength, they can help each other and they can build an amazing army on, you know, both countries, Russia and in China. And I believe they can complement each other. And once they do that, they would be unstoppable. Number 5, China's cross-border payment system and digital yuan. So Russia will have to use China's CIPS systems, because Russia's system has been completely cut off from the West, and Russia has no choice but to use China's system for cross-border trade like oil, gas, as well as other commodities. Russia will not mind at all if China's yuan becomes the number one global currency, because China and Russia are friends. So if China becomes successful and becomes the number one economy in the world with the number one global currency, that's just going to benefit Russia. Russia is not going to care about any of the Western sanctions, because when that happens, none of that will matter. Also, China's digital yuan doesn't need to go through any SWIFT system, so that money is completely untraceable by the West. So they cannot sanction any Chinese companies that do business with Russia or any other friendly countries like Iran or Venezuela, for example, because they can't trace that money. In order to sanction a company or a country, you got to have proof, and SWIFT is their way of basically proving that you've been doing business with that particular entity. So without that proof, they will not be able to sanction any Chinese companies, any Chinese people, because they wouldn't have the proof. I can also see China using digital yuan against all of its neighbors in Central Asia, and also with ASEAN countries as well as part of the RCEP. And only China's renminbi, what I mean renminbi is digital yuan, will only get stronger and stronger. Plus you got 1.4 billion people in China as well using the digital renminbi as well, digital yuan online, and every transaction that they make, and that just improves that global currency's use around the world. So I can see within the next 10 years or so, the China's digital yuan becoming one of the strongest currencies in the world, and I can see dollar falling, because more and more countries will start using the Chinese yuan as opposed to the dollar, because they know using the dollar has severe consequences. You can get easily sanctioned, and America can use it as a weapon against you as well if they don't like you. And a lot of countries are scared to upset America because of sanctions. So once they know there is an alternative system out there, a lot of countries will start moving to the Chinese currency, and they're not going to be as much scared about upsetting America, because a lot of countries are basically under America's thumb. They have no choice. They are under a lot of debt, or they're scared of being sanctioned by America, so they do, as a lot of their bidding for them. So you will see once China becomes the number one economy, and once China's digital yuan becomes one of the top global currencies in the world, you will see a lot more countries starting to use it more and more. Russia's raw materials. So Russia, a lot of people don't realize that Russia produces a lot of raw materials for the world. So if Russia is sanctioned, all of these raw materials they cannot sell to the West, and a lot of these raw materials are needed for very important stuff around the world. For example, neon is needed for chips. But Russia also produces lots of other raw materials that's needed around the world as well, like nickel, and there's lots of other rare earth minerals, and especially food and agriculture stuff as well, like wheat. So China would basically benefit, and especially with this EV market and semiconductor market that China is building at the moment. So if China focuses on that and gets a lot of the raw materials very, very cheap from Russia, they can pretty much control the world in raw material goods, because China produces lots of rare earth minerals as well, and together between Russia and China, I believe they can pretty much control the raw materials markets, the stuff that's required for EV cars, renewable energies like solar, wind, especially semiconductor stuff like neon, and other stuff as well like nickel and things that you need for the military. Russia and China would be working together and basically having a monopoly of all of these rare earth minerals and raw materials, and they can pretty much run the world. And a lot of people don't realize this, that China can trade with the rest of the world, and China can trade with Russia, which means China's got the best of both worlds. The West cannot trade with Russia, but the West can trade with China. If the West completely cuts off China as well, that's it. The West is just shooting itself in the foot, because there is no way that the West can replace any of these raw materials if they're not coming from Russia and if they're not coming from China, because the rest of the world is not going to be able to produce the amount of stuff that China and Russia is producing. So they have a huge advantage here, and especially China, because China's got the best of both worlds at the moment. One thing about Russians, they love to travel, and no matter where you go in the world, you'll always find a Russian traveling. And they love to travel, they love to go to the West, they love to go to America, they love to go to Europe. But because of all of these sanctions and how Russians have been treated around the world, and many of them have been scapegoated and witch hunted, a lot of them are stuck abroad, they can't get home because their Visa and MasterCard has been cancelled. If they've been booking flights or hotels with their Visa or MasterCard and it got cancelled because of the sanctions, then they're pretty much stuck. So there's a lot of Russians out there with no money, stuck somewhere around the world, and nobody's really talking about them. And I feel a bit sad about them, but all of the Russians are going to learn from this experience and think to themselves, you know what, I'm not going to travel to the West anymore, I'm going to travel east. So you can see a lot of Russian tourists going to the east, going to China, going to Asia, and they're going to be sticking there. They're not going to be going to the West, wasting their money anymore. They're going to be sticking to the east. A lot of Russians are going to be going to China. And also Russia is a big country. And as you know, Russia has banned European airlines from flying over its territory, which means Chinese airlines have the advantage. China's going to have the most amount of airports and the most amount of planes over the next 10 years. And the Chinese airline industry is going to have a huge advantage because it can fly over Russian airspace. And I can see over the next few years a lot of Russians traveling from Russia into China, vice versa, a lot of Chinese going into Russia, and there's going to be a huge influx of Russians coming into China, and China's airlines are going to be having a huge advantage because they're going to be flying all over Russia, they're going to be flying across Russia into Europe. Chinese airlines are going to be saving a lot of money, they don't have to go through any detours, and they're going to be saving a lot of fuel as well. The fact that they can use Russian airspace. So Russian airspace is huge. European countries are not that huge, and you can easily bypass Europe. So this is a huge advantage for China. China has got the freedom of Russia, it's got the freedom of Europe, it can travel anywhere. A lot of Russian tourists are going to start focusing on China, and there's going to be a lot more flights between China and Russia. And China's going to have a lot of advantages over Western flights, because Western flights cannot fly over Russia, so they're going to have to take huge detours, spend a lot of money, spend more money on fuel, spend more money on stops. So this is another win for Russia, for China. Number 8, NATO. So one of the things NATO said before the crisis was they're going to expand and focus on China, which China was not very happy about. Even though NATO said they're a defensive alliance, they seem to be a very aggressive alliance. I don't believe they are defensive at all. They have been bombing a lot of countries over the years, like Libya, Yugoslavia, other countries as well, in a more aggressive stance. I mean, like Libya had no danger to Europe whatsoever, and they bombed it to smithereens. They've also were involved in Afghanistan, in Iraq as well. So they're very much an aggressive organization. They're not defensive like they say they are. And they were going to focus on China. Unfortunately for them, this Ukraine crisis has happened, and now NATO is back focusing on Russia again. The whole world is focusing on Russia. America is now focusing on Russia, even though America would love to be focusing on China, keeping the pressure up. At the moment, they got Russia to think about. And fortunately for China, this has given them some breathing space. And, you know, this is good that NATO is busy with Russia. And this is one of the reasons why China is not condemning what Russia is doing, because they know after the Russian crisis is over, NATO is going to focus on China. So if NATO can be busy with Russia, and if Russia keeps NATO busy, China has got a lot of breathing space. China has already got a lot of things to worry about. You got AUKUS, you got the Quad, you got America, you got the First Island chain. You got Taiwan trying to break away from the mainland. You got Japan causing trouble. So there's a lot of things that, you know, China has to worry about, and they don't need NATO on their doorstep as well. So this is one of the things why China and Russia are working together. Russia can focus on the West, and China can focus on the East. So one of the reasons China's winning at the moment is because the global warming is doing a number of things around the world, and one of the things is freeing up Russia's coastline along the Arctic. So this is the Arctic sea route that China and Russia are planning. And at the moment, if China wants to send goods to Europe, there's a lot of choke points that China has to go through, especially around the Malacca Strait. You got the Indian Ocean. You got, you know, a lot of choke points that America or its allies can block China's trade from. So it's very, very risky. So one place that's not very risky is they can actually send ships across the Arctic sea route. And Russia is actually investing a lot of ports around its bases near the Arctic. And they're also building a lot of ships as well, ice-breaking ships. And as the world gets warmer and warmer, this area is going to be less and less icy, so there'll be more and more ships going along the Arctic sea route, which gives China unfiltered access to the rest of the world. And this is why China needs Russia and why Russia needs China. So Chinese goods can travel along there, they can give Russia a bit of money, they can help Russia's economy, and in return Russia will give safe passage for all of Chinese goods traveling along the Arctic sea route. Because of the Western sanctions against Russia, Russia is not going to allow any Western companies or countries to be involved in the Arctic sea route. They will pretty much shut them all out. And they will not allow to be traveling along those routes. So the only countries that will be allowed is China, as well as some friendly countries as well, which Russia will allow. So this is going to be huge. This is probably going to be active in the next 20 years when the world starts getting warmer and warmer and ice caps starts melting. And within the next 20 years, Russia will start becoming more of a superpower, because a lot of the permafrost around the northern side of Russia is going to start to melt, which means it's going to free up a lot of agricultural areas, and Russia's going to pretty much feed the world in terms of agriculture. It's got huge amounts of land. It can grow huge amounts of wheat to feed the rest of the world. There's going to be parts of the world where there's not going to be any agriculture because of global warming. Parts of Africa, India even, and Middle East, they won't be able to grow any food. So Russia will be providing food for the rest of the world. And this is going to be the time when Russia starts becoming a superpower. And the one country that will benefit the most from this is going to be China. With the sea routes that's going to be coming up, access to Russian ports along the journey, and safe passage with Russian ships as well. So China's going to have huge amounts of benefits from this once these routes open up, and Russia's going to become a superpower, and they will also help each other as both China and Russia become stronger and stronger together. Last but not least, Taiwan. So the island of Taiwan, or the province of Taiwan, is basically worried because you see how United States has treated its friends. We're talking about Afghanistan, now Ukraine. A few months ago, Biden was talking to Zelensky, and he was saying to him, "We stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. We will support you in every way we can, even if we help militarily or whichever way we can, we will want to help you." And then what Biden did, he pushed Ukraine into a war with Russia. And once the war had started, Biden's like, "Oh, sorry, I can't send any troops, but we'll give a lot of sanctions to Russia." The Ukrainians feel absolutely betrayed by the West, by NATO, by the Americans. They promised they would help in any conflict with Russia, and they haven't. And all they've done is put sanctions on Russia, which are not going to do much, to be honest. And Russia, as you know, will, circumvent the sanctions. They will sell more oil and gas to China, more goods to China, so they can pretty much ride these sanctions out. What Ukraine is going to suffer with, they're going to lose more than half its country. Russia's going to cut off the Black Sea from Ukraine. Ukraine's economy will crumble, and Ukraine is not going to recover for another 10 to 20 years. And, the West has pretty much pushed Ukraine into this, and the West has stabbed Ukraine in the back for this. And Ukraine will have to be a vassal state for Russia now. They'll have no military. They'll have to follow Russia's orders. If they try and do anything stupid like trying to join NATO or trying to be friendly to the West, Russia will, immediately stamp it down. So they're not going to allow that. So Taiwan is looking from a distance, and all of these separatists who were thinking about having an independence, they're having second thoughts now. They were like, okay, so what if we declare independence and China comes and attacks, declares war? Because it's in China's, constitution that if Taiwan ever declares independence, China would forcefully reunify the island. So if Taiwan ever is forced to accept independence, maybe the Americans will probably use them like they've used Ukraine. They will say, "Oh, go on, we'll be with you. We'll stand shoulder to shoulder with you. You guys can go ahead and declare independence. We're with you. We're right behind you." And then Taiwan declares independence. They look back, and the Americans are nowhere to be seen. The Europeans are nowhere to be seen. And the Taiwanese are like, "Oh, hell, what the hell have we done?" But by then it's too late. China has become too powerful now. The Americans were saying that by 2025, having a war with China would be almost impossible to win. But I believe even now, having a war with China even now would be impossible to win. I think, there is no way they would beat China in a conventional war over Taiwan. No way, because the island is too close to Chinese shores. If any ships came near the Taiwanese Strait, they'll be blown out the water. And if any planes come near, they'll be blown out the sky as well. China's got hypersonic weapons which will target all of the friendly American bases around the area. I'm talking about Japan, South Korea, Guam, Hawaii. So America is not going to attack. I mean, you can see America's reaction to Ukraine. If America were powerful enough and they felt that they could take on Russia, they would have. But they decided not to. And I believe they'll probably make the same decision when they put Taiwan into the flame and let them fend for themselves. So the Americans are setting a very dangerous precedent, and they are shown to be not very good friends around the world. They are shown to be very much users. They like to use and abuse countries, and when they don't need them, they just spit them out like they've done to Afghanistan. So America is not to be trusted, and if Taiwan trusts America and they think that America is going to save them, they're going to make them independent, they got another thing coming. Anyway, that's all for today, guys. Let me know what you think. Do you know any other reasons which I haven't added, which should be in the top 10, we believe that China would be winning from this conflict? Let me know if I've missed anything, or let me know if you're disagreeing with anything, or even if you agree with me. I'll look forward to reading your comments. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do whatever you can to support the channel. You can always buy me a coffee if you really like this, or you can join my Patreon. Thanks guys, and I'll see you soon.